We're going to start this puppy up. Clear? Prop.
And welcome back to Tip of the Week. This week we're going to start our wing rigging, and that entails taking our two wings, attaching them to the plane, and adjusting them just right, or rigging them so that they're within specification before we make final holes and fasten them down. Now, our attachment points are in place, these stainless steel brackets. This is for the front main spar, and then towards the back we have the one in place for the rear spar. So the actual attachment is relatively easy. Now we also have struts to install that are going to hold the wings up. Now before we get into this, let's look at a model plane and review what it is we're trying to accomplish as far as rigging the wings for this particular aircraft. So here is our model with our two wings to help explain the rigging that I'm about to perform. Now, on our wings, we have a front spar and a rear spar, and they get attached into the stainless steel brackets at each end. The first aspect of rigging is, do we want any sweep? And sweep has to do with, well, you've probably seen jet airplanes with the sweep, and that's where the wings are angled back. Now, our plane is very slow. It's not in the 500-mile-an-hour range, so we want absolutely no sweep. In fact, one of our objectives when attaching our spars to the brackets is to make sure we have a very straight line down the front and rear, because our wings are symmetrical. The spars are parallel. So before drilling our attachments, we want our wings installed such that we can shoot a straight line from one end to the other. We don't want it looking like this, and we don't want it looking like this or this. We want them straight. So we want to make sure we are quite perpendicular to the fuselage with both wings, and to ensure that a straight line down the front. And we can control that by how far the spar tube goes into the bracket at each end. Another important aspect of rigging a wing is the angle of incidence of the wing, which affects its angle of attack. And that has to do with, is the wing like this, or like this, as it attaches to the fuselage, because that affects the angle of attack of the wing into the airflow. Now, we're lucky because we don't have to worry about this very important feature, because our attached brackets, those stainless steel brackets, are already attached at the fuselage. And if you recall, or if you look at your fuselage, you will note that the front is 1 inch above the center of our tube, and the rear one is 1 inch below. So we have a 2-inch difference between the front and the back. That's already set by virtue of where those holes were located in the gussets in the tube of our fuselage. So when we attach our wing, we have no adjustment in this regard. So we get off easy on that one. On other airplanes, that's something you have to kind of take care of yourself. So that one we're done with. Now the last adjustment we need to be concerned about are the wings dihedral. And that measures the difference of how the wings are lifted out of a straight plane going across. If we have 0 dihedral, the wings are straight across. If we have some dihedral, they'll start to look like this. They will lift up. And this is a good thing aerodynamically, because it adds more stability in the lateral or the rolling aspect It helps bring the plane back to even, because as you go up, the higher wing has less lift and will tend to bring the plane back down. So it's a way to build in lateral stability by raising both wings the same amount. Now this is determined by the designer, and in our case we want 3 degrees of dihedral, which means each wing will be 3 degrees up from a level plane in relation to below the wing. How do we control that? And that's going to be by our struts. The struts hold the wings up, so we need to create 2 struts for each wing and make the struts long enough that it raises each wing by 3 degrees. And that's why our last step is going to be to create the struts the exact length carefully. And of course we'll demonstrate that. By the way, if you often wonder why some planes have some very large amounts of dihedral, a lot of ultralights that have no no ailerons. Our Affordaplane has ailerons. That's how we control our bank. But some ultralights have no ailerons, and that's why they have lots and lots of dihedral, because without the ailerons to control getting your plane back to level, the increased dihedral creates more of a stable condition to keep it level. Of course, there's drawbacks, right? If you have too much dihedral, you're going to start inducing too much drag. Everything's a trade-off. So 3 degrees is just the right amount for our aircraft. Now, what's nice about it is we're going to attach the wings, and our first step is to make sure they're perpendicular with no sweep. Once that's done, you will note that our wings will basically pivot at those 2 stainless steel clamps. They'll flop down at the end, and then we'll raise it up because it'll be pivoting on the 2 bolts, and we can set the dihedral very nicely.
Part of the challenge of rigging the wings is making sure we have enough room and things are positioned properly so that we can get both wings in place and propped up, be it ladders, tables, whatever the case may be, because ultimately we're going to need to have the room to have both wings up at the same time to ensure proper alignment.
Now, one of the first steps is to make sure we have a line extended on the very back of each spar tube. This will aid in drilling the hole that attaches the bracket to the spar. At each of the brackets that are going to hold the spar, this is the rear spar, of course, we need a way to hold the spar in place while we're trying to get everything aligned. I'm going to take a piece of cut off square tube used from previous project and clamp it using either a C-clamp or, if you have a clamp like this, right here. That way we can put the tube in and it will be self-supporting, at least for that amount of thickness. Approximately right that. And that's in there really good. That way we can set it down. I'm going to move to the forward location and do the same. Here we're at the forward, and I just have temporary nuts in place, tightened down, and another just piece of scrap square tube that we used earlier, and make room for that. Clamp it down, and that's nice and strong now, and that will hold it in.
Now here is the right wing sitting on top of a bench, just balancing, And the idea is I'm going to single-handedly move it over. Should always get help with this. And then place it into the two brackets, front and rear. And if gravity is on my side, it will sit in those brackets, and we'll see if it stays. And here's what it looks like after setting it in the brackets. The other side is just being held up by the table. And now we'll stabilize this and check out its fitting. Note that I have also used a bungee cord between the fuselage tube and the first member of the wing, and that is just to make sure the wing does not pull out away from the brackets inadvertently as I'm working. Also, note that I have used a plastic tie on the rear to ensure that the spar doesn't pop out the top and jump ship as I maneuver the other end of the wing. I am working by myself, so you know all sorts of things can occur. Now, the next thing I discovered was that with the tail on the ground, the wing was slanted downward quite a bit. So I raised the fuselage up with the stool here, and basically the wing cord is now almost level. I'm not shooting for perfectly level. I don't want that. I just want it easier to work on, because otherwise everything is slanting down towards the back, and it makes everything a little more difficult to deal with as the wing is sloping down. Now it is much closer to level. Now we go from the right wing, which is now temporarily attached, and we can think about grabbing the left wing, which I have sitting on the floor, propped up on a sofa here, and we'll pick up the end and do the same thing and insert it into the brackets and secure it so that we don't have any slippage. Did I mention it's a good idea to chalk the wheels, because we don't want this thing sliding around. And now on the left side, we have our left wing propped up on a sofa and a stool, and it needs to come up in the same way to our brackets. And I have a clamp here with a ledge to take care of the main spar, and at the back also a clamp to receive the rear spar. And a bungee was used here to make sure it didn't pull out from the brackets. And now you see the ladder has elevated the wing so that we no longer sit on the sofa. And it turns out that a 6-foot step ladder is just about right for the height. With another ladder, we moved the table away, put another ladder underneath. We have both wings supported. And now we can consider building our struts. And by the way, the 6-foot ladders really come just very nicely close to where the wings need to be. So we can merely shim them up to their final location. I'm almost looking at 3 degrees right now on top of these 6-foot ladders, but we'll measure and check. And as you notice, we're using our bungees to make sure these wings don't creep out of their locations. It clearly is starting to look like an aircraft now. Our next step is to drill through our brackets, the stainless steel brackets, into the spars, both the front and the rear. But before we do that, we want to make sure that these spars are at 90-degree angles to the fuselage tube. And in the center is our fuselage tube, and on the left and right are the wing spars. Those need to be at 90-degree angles prior to drilling. And of course, the way we adjust that is to simply pull the spar in or out, closer or further away from the center fuselage square tube at the front or the rear until we get them at 90 degrees. They're very close, obviously. We just need to check and make sure there isn't any final adjustment that might help make them even more exact. And final verification is that as we look down the end from a wing down the spar towards the center and then across over to the other wing, that we see that they are in fact aligned in a perfect straight line. After drilling a pilot hole, then I go for the full 1/4 inch. And then we can drill from the other side.
And now we will move to the rear spar. I have drilled the pilot hole and now the final 1/4 inch. And we'll get some bolts that are proper lengths, but this will suffice for the time being. Now we just basically need to repeat for the other side. Then I put a very small bolt in it, and that will hold the tube in relation to the bracket while I drill the other side. And then we can take off these clamps and brackets. Handle with care. Now we got all 4 bolts in. Well, there we have it for this week. Now next time we're going to rig the 4 struts and set the dihedral. And then we'll be in really good shape. So until then, everyone, back to building.